Today is Thursday here on the Locked On Network, and you know what that means. It is Crossover Thursday with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. I am Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, and we're getting you prepped for Sunday's contest between Washington and Miami.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to this Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Dolphins, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders and the Miami Dolphins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making us your first listens of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison, host of Locked On Commanders on Twitter at dharrison82. He's Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins on Twitter at Grinding the Tape. And we're covering both sides of this weekend's matchup for you, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. You already know, but we'll tell you anyway. We appreciate every single one of you. This Crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, and you'll get a first deposit match up to $100. In this week's crossover, we're going to talk about what has to happen for the Miami Dolphins to cover and for Washington to upset the 9.5-point spread that FanDuel is currently projecting in a Dolphins win. The matchups that go into this weekend's contest, but we're going to start it all off with the biggest storyline surrounding each of these teams. Kyle, what is going on with the Miami Dolphins?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment you on the beard because it looks very sharp this morning. So props there. As somebody who cannot grow a beard, I always appreciate a good beard when I see one. It's good to catch up. We don't get to do this often, right? The Commanders, Dolphins, it's, if we're lucky, twice every 4 years, depending on where you're finishing in the divisional order now that you have the 17th game. So it's good to catch up with you. But from a Dolphins perspective, coming into this game, the focus is really on how well the Dolphins can mitigate the self-inflicted wounds that they've been experiencing over the course of the past several weeks. You know, that they have 2 interceptions late in the first half against the New York Jets. One of those returned for a touchdown, takes a 10-0 lead, turns it into 10-6. They miss the extra point. The second interception leads to a pick six that's returned for a touchdown. That's neither here nor there. Against the Raiders, you have 3 turnovers. Tua Tagovailoa has a fumble. He has an interception coming out of half, trying to take a shot down the field. This is a team that is so potent, so explosive. But when you get into late season games, mitigating the turnovers and mitigating short fields for opponents, you know, you add up the Dolphins' scoring defense and their defensive metrics have raised significantly since a slow start in the first month of the season, but they have multiple interceptions returned for touchdowns. I believe it's 3 total this season. And you take the short fields where you fumble against New England and to start the second half in week 8, and they get points out of that. You take the fumbles against the Raiders. They directly get 6 points as a result of fumbles that you put on the ground. This scoring defense is 23rd in the league, but the rest of the metrics are pretty promising outside of that. So you have to, as you get into this late season run, Miami's sitting at 8-3. Buffalo is second in the division at 6-6. Hopefully they smell blood in the water and a chance to go on a little bit of a run here. They're home for their next few games after this contest. This is their next to last road game on the regular season schedule. Don't give a game away with mistakes that you would otherwise have a talent advantage in. And that's always something that, whether it's the Jets or Washington, obviously the FanDuel line speaks to what they feel the talent discrepancy is just from the talent that's available for these two teams. But Miami, it's always going to be a question until they stop doing it. And they only have one game this entire season where they have not had a single turnover. That was week 3 against the Broncos when they scored on effectively every possession they had until the end of the game. So for Miami, that's the story is, hey, great. You know, the offense has come to life the last couple of weeks. You're up over 400 yards of offense. You scored 27 points on offense against the Jets defense, but the turnovers. And, you know, you had a fumble against Kansas City in a high-profile game in Germany that was returned for a touchdown. So Miami, they got to clean it up. It's the number one talking point now that the balance has started to come back to this offense a little bit.
Yeah, and if you're Miami Dolphins looking to fix that turnover problem, this might be the matchup that you're really looking for. And unfortunately, through 12 weeks of football. This Washington Commanders defense specifically, but really the Washington Commanders offense has been a part of it as well, facing 3 straight teams earlier in the season that were 32nd in the league in sacks coming into those games, and each of those teams were able to dig themselves into the mid-20s by the time that game was over. Kind of like our friends at BetterHelp. Like if you've got some stress on your side of the ball, come see Washington, and Washington will help you deal with that stress. And that's unfortunate for Commanders fans. But the biggest story this weekend is Ron Rivera taking control of that Commanders defense and looking to be a little bit more of a stress inducer than they have been a stress releaser. I do expect a little bit more blitzing from Ron Rivera's control, not a ton more blitzing. I don't think you're going to see like a Martin Mayhew or what's his name, Kyle? I'm completely blowing the Giants defensive coordinator's name. Wink Martindale. I don't even know why I said Martin Mayhew, the GM of the Washington Commanders, calling the Giants defense. That's insane. But more blitzing from the Washington Commanders with Ron Rivera in charge. But again, not to that kind of a level, just a little bit of an increase. And part of that is because he mentioned that he does want to get defensive tackles, Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne, into some better matchup situations, get them some more one-on-one looks, because especially with the absences of Chase Young and Montez Sweat, I mean, if you're an offensive line, you look at that defensive line, and no disrespect to any of the guys that are on the edges now for the Washington Commanders, but they're just not that threatening. So you focus in on those two guys, you mitigate their ability to impact the game, and then you make these guys who are completely unproven for a reason to some extent try to prove themselves, and just hasn't been working. So I do expect to see more blitzes. I expect to see Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne maybe get mixed around on the defensive line. We've actually seen a little bit, even before Jack Del Rio was fired, of those guys getting a little bit of looks outside the A gaps and on some of those tackles. And I expect to see maybe a little bit more of that. I also expect to see an increase in zone coverage. The Washington Commanders defense, since Ron Rivera has arrived at least, has been known as a zone match defense. And some of that communication complication that a zone match scheme really kind of produces, I think, is what has led to this dip in production on the defense. Kyle, to be completely fair and completely transparent to Dolphins fans, everybody in the Washington media, and I think most Commanders fans would agree, we all look like clowns because we all thought this defense was going to be a top 10, top 8, maybe a top 5 unit in the preseason. They thought so as well. So it's not just us. They thought so internally as well. But I think the complication with Jack Del Rio's version of match zone defense is when you add some new pieces like Emmanuel Forbes, or you lose a piece and you have to put in a guy like Percy Butler in that safety spot, that communication now is already complicated, becomes even more complicated, and the likelihood for one spot to slip out and cause chaos amongst the rest is just higher. And I think that's what we've seen. I think a much more simplified version of zone coverage is probably what you should expect from the Commanders. I do still think it's going to be a zone match defense, just maybe not as many what ifs and if this happens, I have to do this type of situations going on. So a little bit less complicated, but still one of the more complicated types of defensive schemes to run out there today. And obviously, if that's going to happen, I expect a lot less man coverage. This team has been just destroyed by mesh concepts because teams are looking at their man coverage and they're just realizing they don't have the athleticism. You have a guy like Kendall Fuller who cannot run from sideline to sideline with the young talent in this league. You get Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill running a mesh concept with Kendall Fuller having to go through all that traffic and all that mess in man coverage, and it's game over. It has been for much lesser talented receivers and quarterback tandems. So that's what I expect from a Ron Rivera controlled defense this weekend against the Miami Dolphins.
And you're talking the language that Dolphins fans can relate to. Obviously, Vic Fangio is so much zone match defense as well. And early in the season, as they're getting acclimated to it, and then they go up to Buffalo week 4 and they have their injuries, and they don't have one of their play callers in the safety position. And Buffalo hung up 48 points on them for that exact thing that you're talking about, with either losing a piece or having a new player that stepped in and has to acclimate. So this is kind of the stage of the game where you'd like to think these teams can be settled into this a little bit. I'm really fascinated to see what Ron's imprint is on this defense, just based off of the kind of the post-trade deadline version of this team with Del Rio. I think it's probably a good move for them to make a change, and it's obviously center stage for this matchup that we have coming up in week 13.
Yeah, the Washington Commanders, according to the remaining strength of schedule, have the toughest road ahead. And when you're already projected to pick top 5 in the NFL draft, that doesn't speak too highly of your odds. But Ron Rivera is going to give it his best shot. What matchups are going to dictate the result of this Dolphins Commanders game that's coming up next on this Locked On crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Dolphins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this crossover episode, along with all your crossover episodes on the network, are brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros, sharks, guys like Kyle, guys like me who see these teams every single day, you just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and then sit back, watch your winnings roll in. I pick 3 player projections every Thursday night for the Thursday night football matchup this season. I'm doing all right. I'm probably going about 60% successful. This week I'm going with Seattle Seahawks kicker Jason Myers for more than 1.5 field goals made, Cowboys receiver CeeDee Lamb for less than 6.5 receptions, and Dallas Cowboys running back Tony Pollard for more than half a touchdown. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL to get your first deposit matched up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day, every dares. We appreciate you coming through here. Stick around because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories around all of the professional leagues with local experts and Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Continuing our look at the Miami Dolphins visiting the Washington Commanders at beautiful FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland. Biggest matchups, most important players. Kyle, what is the biggest matchup in your eyes for this Miami Dolphins team?
Well, you already alluded to the players, and I think you look at what the strength is for Washington's defense, and it's those interior guys. And the Dolphins have been playing the past several weeks with backup guards. And you probably get Robert Hunt, the right guard, back this week. He dressed last week, but was kind of considered an emergency-only player. And they handled that the same way as center Connor Williams a little earlier in the season. He dressed for a week, did not play, and then came back into the starting lineup the following week. But Rob hadn't played in about a month with a hamstring issue. And the backup guards, whether they be Liam Eichenberg or Lester Cotton, it's a matchup where it's kind of derailed Miami's run game consistency. There's been more miscommunications if you're running stunts up front in pass protection. I thought they had an admirable effort against the Jets, but their passing game was also a little different, just schematic-wise and game plan-wise specifically. A little bit less of the intermediate shots over the middle of the field in that game against the Jets, just with the acknowledgement of how potent that 4-man pass rush is for New York. So do they want to get back to working the 10 to 19 area middle of the field, a little bit longer developing routes? And if they do, those guards having that success rate inside, one of them you can get help from Connor Williams, the other one you can't. So that's really, for me, where if Washington does have a chance to disrupt what Miami does offensively, you look to where their best players live, and you acknowledge that Miami has had backup players who have been playing in those spots the last several weeks.
Yeah, and that interior pressure, if you can get it, has been big. I mean, anytime you talk about an NFL quarterback, nobody likes that. But when you talk about younger quarterbacks, especially, I talked about it with the Commanders facing this Dolphins offense. If you can, you want to get Tua Tagovailoa's eyesight, or eye line as low as possible. You want to get him looking at the pocket, looking at the pass rush instead of looking for his receivers, because we can't see Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. He can't throw to him, right? So I think that's obviously going to be key. And for the Washington Commanders, you don't want to beat the dead horse too much, but that has been something that they've been able to give up over the course of the season. Typically, the tackles are the more weaker spot on the offensive line, but certainly the interior offensive line had its own struggles against Dallas, especially on Thanksgiving. For the Washington Commanders, I think the biggest matchup here, it's going to sound a little bit weird, but it's Sam Howell's patience and ability to take what the Miami Dolphins defense is going to give them versus the pressure that he's going to have to score points in this contest. At the end of the day, the message, on Wednesday, we're going to talk to Ron Rivera and we're going to hear the same old, coach speak of just have to execute and do your job and do your part and everything will work out fine and all that stuff. But the bottom line is you're expecting the Miami Dolphins to come in here and put in points. I've kind of already said, Kyle, that if I don't see this Washington Commanders offense putting up at least 25 points up against the next opponent, I can't possibly with integrity, try to predict the Washington Commanders victory in this game. That number might need to go up to about 35. Like this is a game where you might see the Washington Commanders give up back-to-back 45-point outings to their opponents. And some of that is obviously the defensive struggle, but some of that's just what the Miami Dolphins have been able to do. So when you're Sam Howell, you know that you're aware of that, whether you acknowledge it publicly or not. So the pressure to put points on the board every single time you have the ball is going to be something I'm going to be really interested to see how he handles. Sam Howell, very infamously, if you're a Washington Commanders fan, had a very rough game against the New York Giants, his first time facing them as a starter earlier this season. And the expectation was that second outing, he would be much better. Not so much. And for me, going back and watching the tape, there were a lot of situations where he had underneath routes, he had intermediate routes open. I mean, 3rd and 6 is where he had wide open guys about 8 yards downfield, and he bypassed those guys to take the deep shot, sometimes into double coverage. Some of those led to turnover opportunities. And to me, it looked like a young quarterback that was pressing, trying to not only beat a divisional opponent, but almost trying to make up for the bad performance he had the previous time that he saw that team. And that's a young guy thing to do. You know, I think a lot of young guys, they have that killer mentality. They want to go out there and make those plays. So that pressure alone, like the Miami Dolphins almost come into this game because of that external pressure with like 5 sacks on the board. And I'm really interested to see how Sam Howell responds to that. Because the Dolphins, you know, for everything they have done, one of the not as great teams, I think 20 other teams or so are better than them in red zone defense and goal to go defense. So if Sam Howell can be patient and take the dump offs and let his playmakers make some moves, get into the red zone, get into the goal to go situations, because right now that is where the Dolphins have been the most vulnerable, and Eric Bieniemy should be able to scheme up some opportunities for them to get points in that situation. But if he tries to get it in those chunks by forcing them, that's where you might see another 3-interception day from Sam Howell.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point from a defensive explosive perspective. The Dolphins are number 1 in the NFL in the least amount of explosive plays conceded defensively this season on a per-game basis. They have 41 explosive plays, I believe, or 44 explosive plays through 11 games. So they have really put the ceiling on opposing offenses. So they do dare you to be methodical and not make mistakes and consistently win on first down, because if they get you behind the sticks on 2nd and long, they're going to make you make that decision on, are we going to try to run the ball and set up a 3rd and mid, or are we going to throw the ball? And if we're going to come out and spread the field and try to throw the ball, that's when you look at this bevy of pass rushers that the Dolphins have. Obviously, they lost Jalen Phillips on Black Friday with a torn Achilles for the rest of the season, and that's going to be a tough blow for the Dolphins long term. I do think between Bradley Chubb, Christian Wilkins is tied for the team lead in sacks. He's having a career year and a contract year. He's really motivated. Andrew Van Ginkel, when Jalen Phillips missed time earlier this season, was pretty successful. He had a starring role in the Sunday Night Football win against the New England Patriots in Week 2 when Phillips missed his first game of the season. Zach Sealer is another interior defensive lineman they just paid. He's got 5 sacks this year. Like they've had 5 guys with more than 25 pressures on the season. So they have enough well-roundedness where if you're going to try to hold the ball and make things happen down the field, you'd like to think that pass rush can really get after it and force some mistakes. And I think that's a big matchup for Miami when the Commanders do have the ball, is who steps up opposite on that other side. Is it going to be Emmanuel Ogbah, who's on a big contract but hasn't really played, or is it going to be Andrew Van Ginkel and their role presumably against Andrew Wiley, because they have exclusively rushed. They have sides. Bradley Chubb rushes against left tackles, and Phillips had been rushing against right tackles.
Yeah, and Commanders fans are never happy to hear that an opposing team might be focusing on rushing guys like Andrew Wiley, because he hasn't been as super sharp, I think, as many expected coming from a Super Bowl regular in the Kansas City Chiefs. So those are the key matchups. Those are the key players that are going to play roles in this weekend's game. Coming up next, we're going to talk about what has to go right for the Commanders pull off the upset and what the Dolphins have to do in order to prevent the upset. That's next on today's Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Dolphins, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Commanders brought to you by DoorDash. If it's halftime, that's ordering time. Why root for your team on an empty stomach? You wouldn't do it in the stadium. Don't do it in the living room. Order on DoorDash and save on football watch party favorites. If you're a Miami Dolphins fan traveling to the Washington, D.C. area, the Landover, Maryland area, and you've never been here before, try out Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream. You find them on DoorDash. My favorite flavor is honey vanilla bean, but they've also got a flavor of lemon bar, which is dairy-free. So if you need that, you can still get a treat there. It's very good, very delicious. Highly recommend it. Kickback at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything you need for your watch party. All your favorite restaurants, your favorite stores, retail, grocery, they're all on the app, so you can shop everything you need to get game day ready and get prepared before game day and stock up on your favorite appetizers, tailgate gear, all of it on DoorDash, and then get ready to watch your team compete. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order after downloading the DoorDash app and using the code LOCKED23. Again, that code is LOCKED23 on the DoorDash app after you download it for up to 50% off, up to a $10 value on your first order when you spend $15 or more, subject to change. Terms apply. This crossover episode also brought to you by FanDuel. Score this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Not only are the Commanders currently 9.5-point underdogs against the Dolphins, the over-under for total points scored is set to 49.5. The Commanders are plus 370 on the money line, while the Dolphins carry a minus 480 money line odd to get the victory. If you're thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including those spreads, money line odds, over-unders, total scores, player props. You can make your own parlays. That's my favorite part, and it gets me in trouble almost every week. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season and get your winning right in December. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. Back now to wrap up this crossover Thursday episode, Locked On Dolphins, Locked On Commanders. We're talking about what has to go right for each side to secure their fate. The Miami Dolphins, again, heavy favorites in this game. I think everybody knows why. It's really no secret. Washington Commanders fans, it's going to be interesting to see how many Commanders fans. The ticket sale numbers aren't actually terrible for this game, but with the weather expected to not be super great, it's going to be interesting to see how many actually decide to brave the weather, brave the cold, and come out for this one. And I'm interested, Kyle, to see how Dolphins fans, I don't want to say travel because DC is a transplant city anyway, and this area is a transplant area anyway, but I am interested to see how many Dolphins fans are in the stands as well. The concern is always trap games, right? Like teams come in and they kind of get overconfident about the opponent that they're about to have. I call it feeding the trolls. Earlier this season when the Commanders were hosting the Cardinals, that's what I said. Don't feed the trolls. That's all you have to do in order to win the game. They fed the trolls. They still were able to pull off the victory. But Kyle, is that how you view this matchup this weekend, or what has to happen for the Dolphins in order to not get upset in Landover?
Yeah, and the Dolphins have done a nice job thus far this season. One of the critiques around the team is, well, you only beat the teams you were supposed to, with air quotes. And, they have avoided the letdown game. And that's really what stands out as kind of the difference right now in this AFC East race when you consider Buffalo lost to Denver. And obviously Denver's really hot right now, but Buffalo lost to New England. That's one of New England's 2 wins this season. Buffalo lost to the Jets in week 1 after Aaron Rodgers went down. So those kinds of contests have kind of shaped this AFC race, and the Dolphins have avoided it. I think Mike McDaniel, his team learned that lesson last year where they were very streaky. They win 3 in a row, they lose 3 in a row. Some of the teams that they should have beat, regardless of the quarterback situation that they were dealing with injuries, they win 5 in a row, they lose 5 in a row. So they were very up and down last year. They talked about the emotional maturation of this group. I think you got to come out, you got to tackle is the number one thing for me, because if Washington's going to get chunk plays, I don't know that it's going to be structurally against Miami's defensive structure with the coverage rate. And then you consider the ball hawks they have on the back end. You saw Jalen Ramsey late in the game against the Raiders baited a couple of throws against a rookie quarterback named O'Connell. Is he going to test Sam Howell's patience? Is he going to make it look like he's got a little room while he understands the route concept and he jumps in front of that throw? So I think if Washington's going to have explosive plays and they're going to get chunk gains, it's going to come from Sam Howell extending within the pocket, getting outside the pocket, but keeping his eyes downfields to throw. It's one of the things I was most impressed with when I watched Sam Howell in preparation for this game is he's slippery in the pocket, but he runs largely to throw. And it's when you suck up those underneath defenders that you get outside the pocket, say, okay, I'm going to box him in. And then he ear holes it right around you, and Brian Robinson's catching the ball along the sideline. He's scooting up the sideline for a big gain, right? So that for Miami, within the pocket, tackle your opportunities when you get Sam Howell within your wingspan, And then in space, don't let them get a lot of run after catch and yards after contact as well, because that would be the ticket, I think, for Washington getting the points on the board that they will probably need to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, man. It's hard to tell competitors to be competitive by being patient. Like that's really hard to tell guys to do. But it's almost, would you rather give up a 4-yard run to the quarterback, or would you rather give up a 51-yard touchdown to Brian Robinson down the sideline? That's kind of a pick your poison moment at sometimes. And yeah, even against the Dallas Cowboys in a big loss like that, there were moments where Sam Howell just gets away from pressure and you're not even sure how he was able to do it. So certainly something to watch there if you're a Miami Dolphins fan. For the Washington Commanders, it's been the same narrative all season long, but it's the explosives, and you can't give up explosives to any team, but especially this Miami Dolphins team, because they might be the most explosive in the National Football League. But not only that, every team gives up explosives, here and there. Even the Miami Dolphins, who, like you said, are one of the best or the best in the NFL this year in preventing those. They still happen from time to time. But the key really isn't just giving up the explosive, is what you do after the explosive. And the resiliency there has not been there this season for the Washington Commanders. And just as of late, the last 2 games alone, about 80% to 85% of the points that their opponents scored came on drives where they were able to notch at least one explosive play. And some of that, obviously, explosive play eats up a lot of yards, so you're going to get into scoring range more often. But it's not just that. It's also how this defense seems to respond after giving up those chunk plays. They just kind of seem to get self-defeated. And with Jack Del Rio fired, with their secondary coach getting fired this last week, and with Ron Rivera taking the reins, you just kind of have to worry about, if they give up early explosive plays, is it going to turn into one of those, okay, well, nothing has really changed, woe is us, and this is the same old defense. And then that's when Tyreek Hill puts up 40 points for my fantasy team, and at least I can walk away with a little bit of a silver lining from my day of coverage. So, as insane as it seems to say that that's the key to the Washington Commanders pulling off an upset, preventing those explosive plays, you gotta live with the underneath stuff, and you got to try to make the tackles as best you can, because if you let this Dolphins offense get running in a track meet, it's going to be game over before halftime. So should be an entertaining game. Kyle, I told Commanders fans at the beginning of the season, this team might win 4 games, it might win 14 games. Either way, there was going to be a lot of entertainment. I really expected that to come in the development of the offense, not the implosion of the defense. And so far, they've only got 4 wins. So I may have been more correct than I thought I was when I said that. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, previewing this game. I look forward to seeing the Dolphins. I've never seen Tyreek Hill play in person, so I'm really looking forward to seeing that as a football fan. Just one of those bucket list items that you get to check off the list. So that's going to do it, Commanders fans, Dolphins fans, for this crossover Thursday episode, Locked On Dolphins, Locked On Commanders. Don't forget, Locked On has also launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming sports channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. Make sure you go there. You'll probably see us talking about this matchup a little bit on that stream as well. Coming up, make sure you follow Kyle on Twitter at Grinding the Tape. Find me on Twitter at DHarrison82. We've each got at least one more episode coming before these 2 teams take the field on Sunday. As always, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thank you for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Till we speak again, please be safe, be kind. We'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, Locked On Dolphins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.